In Pokemon lore, dragons are depicted as some of the most powerful Pokemon to ever exist. From the giant Dragonite's appearance in the early anime episode with Bill's Lighthouse, to Champion Lance, one of the strongest Elite Four members, having 3 Dragonites. But what if I told you, at least in the early generations, Dragon types being powerful was a huge lie? Dragons were notoriously terrible competitively, and if they were decent, they certainly weren't even using Dragon moves. So today we're going to see how Pokemon saved the Dragon type and made them the unstoppable monsters that we know them to be today. And we will even go a step further and see how they were nerfed after their rise to power. Let's get right into it, starting with the first generation. To be a dragon was once worse than useless. Now, this doesn't mean that the dragons themselves were bad, but not only were they not amazing, any success they may have had came largely in spite of their dragon typing, not because of it. Back then, being a dragon brought nearly no positives, and some major negatives. In Gen 1, you only had the Dragonite line. Gen 1 Dragonite is controversial, with its agility wrap antics fully abusing the most despised Gen 1 mechanic, wrap, which is essentially a flinch move. However, this has nothing to do with Dragonite being dragon. In fact, one of the reasons Dragonite is manageable is because it's dragon. Resist to water, electric, fire, and grass all sound nice, but the grass resist is useless in a generation where Exeggutor occasionally uses the 40 BP Mega Drain, and Dragonite is half flying anyway. The Tier's 1 fire move, Moltres' Fire Blast, has a 30% burn rate in Gen 1, so you don't want Dragonite switching into that either. The Tier's sole water move, Stormy Surf, isn't too common, and you can't utilize this water resist safely anyway, because of the most defining characteristic of Dragonite's dragon typing, which is of course being quadruple weak to ice. This is so bad, because ice moves are already flying around every game of Gen 1 like hotcakes. The electric neutrality is nice, but Dragonite would much rather have a singular electric weakness and a singular ice weakness than an electric neutrality and quadruple ice weakness, especially since 2 of the Tier's most common Thunderbolts come from Starmie and Chansey, which also pack ice coverage. You would take being worse into Zapdos in exchange for not getting blizzarded by Tauros. Dragonite would genuinely rather be normal than dragon in Gen 1. Wow, foreshadowing. So why not ditch the flying type instead of dragon? Because immunity to Rhydon's mighty Earthquake is rare and valuable. Okay, well, this is an offensive Pokemon, and it's not supposed to be a perfect hit taker. So if that dragon type gives it some sort of offense, all is well. But in Gen 1, the only dragon move was Dragon Rage, which deals 40 damage. And no, not 40 base power like Mega Drain. 40 damage flat, as in it 18 hit KOs Chansey, and is banned from Little Cup. So no, Dragon does not provide meaningful offense. Then in Gen 2, the Dragon typing still did more harm than good. But before we talk about how bad Gen 2 Dragons were, let's talk about the Snapdragon 8 Elite and the new tablet from our friends at REDMAGIC. The REDMAGIC Astra Gaming Tablet. What's better than a phone with a strong Snapdragon 8 Elite and improved liquid metal cooling technology? A bigger screen version with improved specs, of course. The REDMAGIC Astra Gaming Tablet has a 9-inch display screen with 2.4K resolution. It also has an amazing 8200 mAh battery for fast charging, and my favorite feature, a 165Hz refresh rate screen. That is as good as my gaming monitor on my PC. The input delay on the games that I play are basically non-existent, and of course, mobile games look amazing. Now I can open my daily Pocket TCG packs in 2.4K, and it runs the emulators I love playing even smoother, especially Dolphin. I can play some of my favorite GameCube games on the go, but this time on an even bigger screen. I'll admit though, I am more of a retro gamer at this point, but don't worry, it runs modern games like Genshin Impact really well too. There's never a dull moment with this tablet. So if you want an amazing, affordable gaming tablet and also support the channel to help us produce more content, click my link in the description below to learn more about the REDMAGIC Astra Gaming Tablet. The grass resist was still useless, and the fire resist was more useful without the 30% burn rate, but still largely useless. The water resist was useful, considering so many growth Vaporeon went with mono water coverage, but the second it decided to use Ice Beam, as it did more and more over time for non-Dragonite reasons, that resist went out the window. Still, it was good, especially because its flying typing meant it was Gen 2's only Spike's immune water resist, giving it a unique resilience against such a threat. But in exchange, it was given a much more crippling weakness. Its electric neutrality was now rendered useless in the wake of Hidden Power Ice, which meant it had to run terrified from Zapdos and Raikou. In general, it could have a seriously tough time finding its way into battle against all the ice coverage flying around alongside the electrics, as Gengar now packed Ice Beam, and Nidoking was a new threat that never went without Ice Beam, to say nothing of the eventual rise in Jynx. At least Dragonite wasn't the only dragon anymore. It was now joined by Kingdra, whose water dragon typing seemed a lot more intuitive at first. The quadruple water resist was wonderful against Vaporeon, and it had only one weakness: Dragon itself. And since there's still no Dragon offense, you're never hitting it super effectively. However, since there's no Dragon offense, Kingdra's not really doing anything in return. Yes, it's quite tanky, and the neutrality to everything is nice, but it's still outclassed by Suicune, whose bulk is such that even the electric weakness doesn't stop it from being a much better choice over Kingdra. Technically, if you were to use Kingdra, it would be for its Dragon offense, so-called. Except the appeal of Dragon Breath wasn't its paltry 60 base power, even with Stab, but it was the fact that it had a 30% paralysis rate. It was effectively a body slam that threatened Gengar. However, it wasn't even the only or the most common Dragon Breath user. On the rare occasion you were to see the move in Gen 2 OU, it would almost surely come from Steelix, which used it over Body Slam because, with reduced special attack EVs, it was so weak that it wouldn't outdamage Zapdos' leftovers, meaning Zapdos would be able to rest the paralysis off. That's right, a Dragon move used not just for status utility, but to inflict as little damage as possible while doing it. But what about that other Dragon move Gen 2 introduced and gave to Dragonite? Outrage. Now you might hear that and go, oh yeah, you see Outrage even today, as in Gen 9 Uber's Choice Scarf Koraidon runs it. Surely it's gotta do something here, right? Yeah, no. The Outrage that Koraidon locks itself into is worth the risk for its massive 120 base power. In Gen 2, Outrage still makes you lock yourself in for 2 to 3 turns, in exchange for 90 base power. That kind of risk, especially on a move that's not going to be hitting for super effective damage, requires crushing power that atomizes neutral targets and threatens to melt even resist. Gen 2 Dragonite could pose a pretty fair offensive threat, but it did so through Dynamic Punch, Thunder Wave, Ice Beam, and Thunder or Thunderbolt. Not a stab move in sight. Luckily, the next generation was better for dragons. The third generation is where Pokemon began to save the Dragon type. Here, you could actually use Dragon type offense, and their Dragon-based resist actually started being useful. It made navigating the brutal ice weakness much more palatable, a reasonable cost of doing business, since you now had actual Dragon business you could conduct. This was most fully on display in the tier above OU, where the first 3 Dragon Ubers now resided. The Laddie twins, with their signature Soul Dews built-in Calm Mind, were arguably the most perfect Pokemon in the entire generation. They weren't just great Pokemon that happened to be Dragon either. Their Dragonness was a central part of how powerful they were. Their resists to water and electric were invaluable in a tier with Kyogre, and they actually dished out Dragon-type offense thanks to the newly added Dragon Claw and its solid 80 base power. It wasn't mandatory for them to run though, as they often chose to run Ice Beam as their coverage for opposing Laddies, while also gaining a super effective smack on Groudon. Rayquaza was another excellent Dragon Uber, but it didn't use Dragon Claw, instead focusing on physical sets. It did enjoy its Dragon typing defensively though, pivoting into water moves and ignoring the Rain Boost with Airlock. It was a similar story with OU's new defining dragon, Salamence. For much of Gen 3's history, Salamence primarily barraged opponents with its physical stab, Hidden Power Flying, on Choice Band and Dragon Dance sets. But eventually it started using Dragon Claw on a special coverage set named Elements, and with the later addition of Brick Break, that set morphed into what is still known today as Mixments, Wall Breaker Extraordinaire. While it specialized in super effective coverage, Dragon Claw was still superb because of how spammable it was. Even when Salamence wasn't using Dragon Stab though, it enjoyed the benefit of its Dragon typing defensively to pivot into and around all manner of fire and water moves, while the electric neutrality was wonderful against Zapdos, who most commonly carried HP Grass. And indeed, the popularity of HP Grass, including on Celebi, meant that the quadruple grass resist was actually useful now. OU's other dragon, Flygon, had much lower special attack, so it wasn't going to be using Dragon Claw, which was a shame because of the amazing synergy Ground and Dragon have together, as Ground hits Dragon's Soul Resist super effectively. Instead, Flygon primarily functioned as just a ground type. However, it too enjoyed the benefits of its Dragon typing, as it was a ground type that was neutral to grass and water, and the former trait made it an amazing check to Zapdos. Finally, the occasional late-game Rain Dance Swift Swim Kingdra, even if it had lured Dragon Claw, likely wouldn't use it, as Ice Beam's coverage was far better for Celebi. Gen 3 Dragon is certainly a major step ahead of the first 2 gens, but it's still not the world-crushing powerhouse the Pokemon lore would promise us. And then Gen 4 came around. The changes brought about by Diamond and Pearl made sure dragons were completely and utterly saved. Maybe they were too saved. Dragon Stab went through the roof. with an overheat clone named Draco Meteor and buffing outrage to 120 base power. That wasn't all. With the physical special split, suddenly you could use Dragon Stab off of your special attack or your attack stat or both. The power kept coming with new boosting options in Life Orb and Choice Specs. Suddenly, dragons were the strongest, scariest type in the game, specifically because they were dragons. Flygon's Dragon Ground Stab combo appeared on the new Garchomp, which terrorized Diamond and Pearl and was banned right before Platinum. With Garchomp no longer around, as well as the Platinum gained Outrage, Flygon wielded that same stab combination to incredible effect as well. And you know who else gained Outrage in Platinum? Salamence. There was nothing scarier than late-game Dragon Dance Outrage on a Pokemon of Salamence's speed and power. And you know what else happened in Platinum? Latias without Soldew was unbanned. Generation 4 was officially in its Dragon era. A common joke at the time was that the optimal team was Triple Dragon, Triple Steel, and like most jokes, it actually wasn't too far from the truth. Dragons were so powerful and ubiquitous that much of your efforts were spent defending against them, and in many cases, recognizing their power as the optimal strategy to utilize yourself. It wasn't literal, of course, as there were plenty of great non-dragon, non-steel Pokemon. For instance, Blissey and the newly special defense in sand-boosted Tyranitar were honorary dragon resist against Draco Meteor, while Mamoswine's Ice Shard was an excellent revenge killer to the Dragon Onslaught. But so many teams packed Latias, Salamence, Flygon, and even the newly Dragon Stab spamming Kingdra, as well as many steals they could afford. Steals weren't even necessarily safe, given the wide toolkit of these dragons, but they were more safe than most everything else, and sometimes you could forget the coverage. Dragons would often mash their way through steals through raw power alone, like Specs Latias' Draco threatening to 2-hit KO Scizor after Stealth Rock, even after the special attack drop. Or how the Guessment's problem was that even if you guessed the correct Salamence set and predicted correctly against it, two major ifs by the way, it would still, at minimum, tear massive holes into your team through unbelievable power. Come Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Dragonite gained extreme speed, and it joined the party with its own Draco Meteors on its new attacking lead sets that Salamence couldn't replicate, eventually shifting to a unique Choice Band set. Dragmag also became popular around this time, Dragonites and Magnezone. Magnezone's Magnet Pull trapping the one type that resisted Dragon had already made it a superb partner for Dragon Dance Salamence, especially with how it pivoted into Scizor's ever-popular Bullet Punch. But now the strategy was taken to greater extremes, more in line with the general metagame strategy of throwing as many Dragon offense as possible at your opponent. The team that made it popular was referred to as 4Drag2Mag, with Magnezone joined by Magneton. The fact that such a seemingly gimmicky team was actually successful spoke to just how absurd the Dragons were able to brute force their way through just about everything. Speaking of throwing as much Dragon offense as possible at the opponent, seeing as Dragon Stab was so often the move, many Dragons also tended to run multiple Dragon Stabs for different situations. Spec Latias used both Draco Meteor and Dragon Pulse, which would later be imitated by Spec's Kingdra. Mixed Salamence began using both Draco Meteor and Outrage to crush the opponent both physically and specially at the same time, which made it really impossible to play around. Kingdra also ran Draco Meteor and Outrage when used on rain teams, especially in Ubers, and after Salamence's ban, Dragonite and Flygon followed suit. Salamence's ban officially marked the end of the Dragons era, having followed the ban of Latias, but even without them, Dragon had officially established its innate power over the rest of the game, and was still felt every time Dragon crushed something with Outrage. Years down the line, Latias was unbanned and was again extraordinary, but not just for power. It had previously been used on stall teams with a bulky calm mindset, but now Latias took over, with its many Dragon resists allowing it to shut down many forms of vicious offense like Zapdos' Thunderbolt. Part of the reasons Dragons unleashed such wicked offense was because their Dragon resist let them pivot into things like Heatran Fire Blasts and Breloom Seed Bombs, which translated well to Latias' defensive set. Oh, and you think OU was Dragon infested? Gen 4 Ubers is basically Draco Meteor the metagame. The Soldew laddies have returned, and Rayquaza's packing it as well. The new additions all get in on the Draco Meteor action too. Dialga Palkia, which also uses the superb Spatial Ren, and come Platinum Giratina Origin. So many sequences and so many battles are turn-by-turn trades between progressively faster Draco Meteor users. But don't worry, there's plenty of outrage too, between Rayquaza, Giratina Origin, the occasional Blissey luring mixed Dialga Palkia, and the sole always physical dragon, Garchomp, is utterly superb. Gen 4 ensured Dragons were the competitive equivalent of the hype bestowed upon them in the lore. You start playing in that gen gen, expecting dragons to be great, and you'd have your expectations matched and then some. Gen 5 though was basically the Dragonator, Judgment Day, taking your expectations and exceeding them so wildly that it's still difficult to believe it was real. Garchomp and Salamence returned to OU, joined by Latios and Latios. Meanwhile, Dragonite had gained multiscale, making it even more threatening. Oh, and this is before we look at the new dragons, Hydreigon and Haxorus. Hydreigon packed brutal Draco Meteors alongside a lack of weakness to Stealth Rock and Pursuit. Meanwhile, Haxorus had base 147 attack. Salamence's base 135 attack Dragon Dance Outrages had already felt excessive, but just in case that wasn't enough, this thing also got Swords Dance, making Garchomp's base 130 feel quaint. Of course, Haxorus isn't as fast, but number 1 is not quad weak to ice, and number 2, look at the strong. Holy destruction beyond human language, Batman. Oh, and in case that wasn't enough, Kyurem was also a force. It was the only dragon at this time to run some sets without Dragon Stab, since Stab Ice Beam was preferred if you could only have one, but Kyurem could also run a Spec set whose Draco Meteor was as powerful as Latios's. Actually, even stronger because it could afford to run a Modest Nature. Even the addition of one of the most perfect steel types ever, Ferrothorn, couldn't hold dragons back, not least because Dragbag really took off in Gen 5, but once again, you didn't necessarily need Magnezone to throttle everything in sight. Whatever your problem, spamming dragons at it usually helped. Speaking of Black and White 2, that was the drop of a new dragon into OU, Kyurem Black. Remember all we said about Haxorus' base 147 attack and how it left the other dragons in the dust? Kyurem Black was that, but with a 170 base attack. Gen 5 didn't have a dragon era like Gen 4 did. The entire metagame was the dragon era. Game Freak had more than just saved the dragon type, they had made the rest of the game need saving from the dragon type. And then Generation 6 came around, famously bringing with it the fairy type that was not just resistant, but immune to dragon. You couldn't smash your way through them with raw power, as an unboosted Latias Dragon Pulse would be just as ineffective against a fairy type at 20% as Kyurem Black's Banded Outrage. Locking into Outrage was now much riskier. Previously, an Outrage locked Pokemon would still leave the revenge killing Steel type with a pretty hefty dent. Now you do a whopping 0%. And of course, the fairy type came built in with the super effective stab against you. The immunity was bad enough, but dragons had now gained the weakness as well. And these fairy types were no small fries either. They were good, among the very best Pokemon in the metagame. In fact, for a time, some players thought fairy types themselves might be a little too good, becoming the new dragons in a way. Now, this was quite an obstacle, but hey, dragons have methods of messing with fairy types like any other Pokemon might manage immunities to their attacks. Landorus Therian loves its Earthquake in spite of a massive number of Pokemon immune to it, which is far more than what dragons have to contend with. However, fairy types weren't the only problem for dragons. Outrage was riskier, but it was always risky to an extent, and there was still Draco Meteor. But in Gen 6, Game Freak toned down the base power of several attacks, and it must be said, this is a power creep combating decision that they should be congratulated for. This included Draco Meteor, which was nerfed from 140 base power to 130. Obviously, this is still an immensely powerful attack, but the difference was significant and noticeable right from the jump. Suddenly, Latios had what felt like a strangely difficult time breaking through Pokemon that it previously eviscerated, like Slowbro and Gliscor. The base power nerfs also messed with its coverage. Surf was now 90, down from 95, and Hidden Power Fire was now 60, down from 70, meaning it was easier to play around it with previously existing checks like Tyranitar, Heatran, and Ferrothorn. It wasn't all bad, of course. Both Hydreigon stabs were completely stifled by fairy types, and its Spec set became one of the scariest threats around because all it took was one Flash Cannon on the Switch, and suddenly Clefable couldn't switch into Dark Pulse anymore. But that's exactly it. Hydreigon was primarily spamming Dark Pulse now. Draco was still a great move to have, but it wasn't the primary option it had been in Gen 5. Hydreigon also experimented with other sets like Expert Belt, and those dropped Draco entirely. Hydreigon symbolized the shifts that dragons overall were making away from dragon moves, even if they did actually still have one. Yes, Specs Latios was always going to run Draco Meteor, but it also began running a move it wouldn't have been caught dead with previously, Psy Shock, which let in Tyranitar freely, but was massive for letting it actually threaten Clefable. Base and Mega Latias dropped Dragon Pulse for either Psychic or Ice Beam, with Mega Latias also using stored power. This shift seemed almost by design. Mega Garchomp became a sand-abusing Sandforce threat, so no wonder you'd rather use Stone Edge over Dragon coverage, while in Oraz, Mega Salamence effectively turned into a pure flying type. Though amazingly, in VGC, it sometimes used Draco Meteor to lure other Megamans. That's right, the Dragon type with enormous special attack used Draco Meteor, as a surprise to lure itself. Dragons were still amazing Pokemon, but it was less about the dragon nest now and more about their other qualities. Gen 6 saw this shift begin, and Gen 7 saw it completed. Dragon Stab was popular at first, but eventually it became nigh exclusive to Mega Charizard X, which was first and foremost a fire attacker and was also known to drop dragon coverage on occasion, though it was still miles away from other dragons, which wound up dropping Dragon Stab almost always. Garchomp's Swords Dance boosted Outrage turned into devastating Drake had ludicrous power without locking in, while the newly excellent Dragon Ground Zygarde also ran Dragonium Z to strong effect. However, over time, these faded. No decent player would want their Z move against a fairy type, but then you risk never getting to click Z at all. Spamming Dragon had become so much worse, not just because of the 5 new amazing fairy types, Magearna and the 4 Tapus, or 6 if you count the return of the previously banned Mega Mawile, but also because of Tapu Fini's Misty Terrain, weakening Dragon moves even when it wasn't on the field. Eventually, Zygarde started dropping Outrage on its Choice Band set, and by the time it was banned, no good player was using any sets with Dragon Stab. It did enjoy being a Dragon type, but only really for its resist to Heatran's Magma Storm. The same went for Garchomp, whose Swords Dance Z sets eventually shifted from Z-Dragon to Z-Rock. You can't have that no longer perfect stab combination walled by Tapu Bulu. Its Stone Edge's turn Continental Crushes were menacing, but created a strange dynamic where Mega Latias, knowing the Chomp wouldn't be able to hit it with a Dragon move, became a safe switch. It survived the unboosted Z hit and threatened the KO with Ice Beam if Chomp tried to Swords Dance. Think about that. A Dragon type switched into a Dragon type. The first Dragon switched in knowing that the second Dragon doesn't have Dragon Stab. And the most bizarre part of it all, eventually Garchomp started sneaking Z Outrage back into its moveset, specifically to lure Mega Latias. That's right, Dragon lures Dragon with Surprise Dragon move. That wasn't the only instance of Surprise Dragon Stab either. Mega Latios was an immense threat, reaping the benefits of its Dragon resistance to check Heatran and unleash major offense. But forget Draco Meteor, its primary stab was the Clefable and Fini Shredding Psychic. It rounded out its coverage with Ice Beam and Earthquake, using Recover in the last slot. Previously, the Pokemon most synonymous with dropping a Draco was now dedicated to spamming Psychic moves. But wait, Mega Latios found Greninja switching into it quite easily, and found itself completely walled by the increasingly popular Reuniclus, so it used Draco Meteor to lure these two. Yup, these non-steals were countering Mega Latios too easily, so it baited them in by unexpectedly using the strongest move in its arsenal. Occasionally, Dragon moves still had potential, but they were specific now. They were niche, to be used with extreme care. Take the case of Komo-O and its signature Z move. Clangorous Soul Blaze is incredibly good. Superb power paired with a boost to every one of its stats. It's a terror if used right. However, many Komo-O sets don't have Dragon coverage at all. Even when the reward of the Dragon move is so potentially high, the potential waste it can so easily be rendered by the ubiquitous fairy types leave it more interested in other Z moves, like Poison Jab turned Acid Downpour to lure those fairy types. As its other stab is close combat, Komo-O winds up functioning more like a fighting type. It loves its Dragon typing resisting fire, grass, and water, but is primarily threatening you from the fighting side. The most consistent Dragon spam came from Naganado, whose Nasty Plot Z Draco Meteor was so scary because its secondary Poison Stab kept fairy types out, and it was banned very quickly. This trend continued into Gen 8, though Dragons did get some of their mojo back with the addition of Scale Shot. This allows Garchomp's Swords Dance to not just boost its speed, but to potentially do major damage more than that of Dragon Claw without the risk of Outrage locking in. Meanwhile, Dragon Dance Dragapult loves Dragon Darts, which is also stronger than Dragon Claw. Still, the dragons without Dragon moves are common, even if it's not a universal law. Specs Dragapult can drop some major Dracos, but it's first and foremost a Shadow Ball spammer, and its status spam sets often drop Dragon moves. Meanwhile, Dragonite literally never uses Dragon moves. When it does run Stab, it's the Flying Dual Wing Beat, and when it doesn't, it runs Ice Punch to hit Garchomp and Landorus T. Kyurem wound up being banned, but this was almost solely off of the strength of its Ice spam, and when it did use Draco Meteor, it was as a lure for Volcarona and other Kyurem. Even Choice Specs Kyurem considered Draco Meteor secondary to Earth Power or Focus Blast. Finally, in Gen 9, Dragonite's Choice Band set returned, and that can use Outrage, but you know what its primary appeal is? Terra Normal Extreme Speed, and this Outrage is not the spammable monster it once was. Choice Band Dragonite pairs it with Ice Spinner for similar coverage. Previously it would have been Dragon Claw. Now the cost of doing 0% to fairy types is too high. You just can't let Iron Valiant waltz in. And that's before taking into consideration how many Pokemon that didn't start the battle as a fairy type will wind up terrestrializing into it. Speaking of which, Dragapult Dragapult likes terrestrializing into a fairy type now, completely turning the tables on the opposing dragons. Turns out sometimes the best way to be a dragon is to not be a dragon at all. Now dragon power is still superb, of course. Baxcalibur was banned in spectacular fashion, with loaded dice turning its scale shot into an utter monstrosity. And look at the trio of Walking Wake, Raging Bolt, and Gouging Fire, with Gouging Fire also winding up in Ubers, but also looking at how these Pokemon need to overcome their fairy type foes through both immense power and the fact that they're not just dragons. Their secondary typing is absolutely essential now. Baxcalibur was basically a Curub situation, while Walking Wake, Raging Bolt, and Gouging Fire all primarily spam their non-dragon stab. How could they not? Plus, think back to Gen 6. We are so lucky that Game Freak weakened so many moves back then. Even with fairy types, dealing with Walking Wake's Draco Meteor if it were 10 base power stronger would be nightmarish. Now, if you want to succeed as a dragon, it's not quite in spite of your dragon typing, but you do have a significant series of obstacles to overcome. Game Freak started dragons off without wings down in the dirt, then threw them to the highest point in the sky, only to finally bring them down to earth. But this time, they've got the wings to try and get back up there. And we have seen the initial struggle of the dragon type, and then its dragon ascent to glory, to its return to humility. But is this the same story in the realm of VGC? Well, the clear answer is no. The dragon type has been nothing but exceptional in the history of competitive doubles. There have been 15 VGC World Championships since the term VGC was even coined, and a dragon type has won 9 of them. Adding to that incredibly successful statistic, dragon types have been present in the finals of VGC Worlds 12 out of 15 times. The efficacy of our draconic overlords is nigh undeniable. In 2009, Kazuyuki Tsuji used Salamence's strong defensive ability Intimidate, coupled with its immediate offensive presence, to support the anti-rain team that took it all. In 2010, Ray Rizzle's Trick Room Dialga allowed him to readily handle the Kyogre matchup and invert the speeds on the board to sweep with the rest of his powerful squad. In 2011, Ray Rizzle once again brought a dragon type in the form of Hydreigon to dish insane damage with its powerful Draco Meteors. And for the three-peat, in 2012, Ray Rizzle not only brought Hydreigon to the mix, but added Garchomp to the team to abuse the age-old Levitate Quake strat, backed up by the monstrosity of his draconic offensive pair. In 2013, Arash Amadi used Latios' boosted Draco Meteor to take the glory home by guaranteeing at least one kill turn 1 due to its insane power. In 2014, Sajin's Garchomp complemented Mega Gyarados beautifully and was part of the offensive core that Pachirisu complemented so well. 2015 was the first year dragon types were absent due to the sheer dominance of the Chalk strategy. In 2016, Wolf Glick used not only the most powerful dragon of all time, but the most powerful Pokemon possibly ever, Mega Rayquaza, to secure the title of World Champion. 2017 was the second year where a dragon was not crowned as a champion, but San Pendelis' Garchomp sure got close with second place. In 2018, Paul Ruiz used Mega Salamence in a very similar fashion to 2016 Mega Rayquaza, utilizing immediate flying and dragon-type pressure to break through opponents to facilitate a sweep for the rest of the team members. Naoto Mizobuchi repeated a similar formula to Paul's in 2019, showing that even unrestricted formats were not enough to contain the dragon type's excellence at the time. 2020 and 2021 saw a break from VGC during the pandemic. 2022 introduced Zacian Crown, and with it, the dead dreams of 1,000 dragons, marking the second time a dragon was absent from the finals. 2023 was a close one for Dragon Masters, as Michael Kelch's Dragapult managed to get a very impressive second place in the wake of so many Chien-Pao and Fluttermanes everywhere. Finally, in 2024, Luca Carabelli's Miraidon was the star of the show, utilizing its equally terrifying Draco Meters and Electro Drifts to full effect in order to crown himself as the most recent champion in Pokemon history. Dragons have known success and struggle in history, but they are sure a safe bet in VGC. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Eric Dissing, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Gameslayer, Nurse Jake, Pretzel SP, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu, Wardine, for their major support of our videos.